down and rebuilt, sort of fit in with Westfield. Still, the things still stand out just a little bit. Down to the right, just before Foot Locker, there's a glass awning a bit lower than the other. That's the family-owned property, and instead of taking a one-off payment for Westfield, they can now charge at least $11,000 per square metre per year in rent. They're making a pretty good profit on that place. It's a good call for them. The last thing here, though, is the tower. Now, I'll tell you more about Sydney Tower when we actually have a good view of it. Just remember, if you want to get up there, this is how you get here. Pitt Street Mall, Westfield. We'll lead the shoppers and the buskers to it, head along Market Street into Hyde Park.
Hyde Park. Все, я пошла в прямой эфир, потому что он какими-то другими путями ведет.
Только меня не снимай, пожалуйста.
Хорошо. Я пока вон посмотрю, кто там приходит. Так, кто-то мне уже хочет какие-то, совместные эфиры. Извините, люди, у меня прямая трансляция очень важного мероприятия. Я им даже по-русски говорю, чтобы им совсем понятно было. Какие-то чучмеки приходят, я говорю по-русски, чтобы все было сразу понятно. Добро пожаловать в Сидней. Кто у нас на связи? Тетя с разноцветными волосами. Да, спасибо. Мне просто выше тяжело, у меня руки уже, знаешь, уже в который день в напряжении снимать все время все вокруг.
Тебя слышно, то, что ты говоришь?
Да, слышно. А чё? Ну как красиво. Народ кругом красиво. Это какая у нас мода. Я просто могу подальше от вас снимать, а вы можете там беседовать, что хотите. А вы шепотом на ушко. У нас сегодня жарко. Люди с зонтиками от солнца.
I didn't know that could happen. I would have expected it to be a little still like that. Not anymore. They sold about 5-6 years ago to a French company. Yeah, they literally started in a field in the west of Sydney. Yeah. We're quite proud of it. Still ours. Alright, so we're in Hyde Park, like all the ones around the world, named after the one in London. A lot of familiar names around here. For the British, this was a parade ground, football field, horse racing track. If you see it from above, it's still a big long curve down this end. And the first cricket ground in Australia was somewhere here in the early 1800s. Now, we also have Archibald Memorial Fountain, built in 1932. The money came from J.F. Archibald, quite an eccentric Australian journalist and businessman. He became so obsessed with France when he was a teenager that he officially changed his name from John Feltham to Jules Francois. Didn't stop his friends calling him Archie though. And he left money on his death as well for a fountain designed by a French sculptor, which would look at home somewhere like Versailles. And he wanted it to represent Australia's ties to the French, forged during the First World War. Does it through some Greek mythological figures and one Roman one. They got a little bit confused with the mythology. But speaking of mythology, St Mary's Catholic Cathedral. The original building was there for 34 years until 1865 when it burnt to the ground. Then we built a smaller wooden one next to it, which burnt down even faster. It's made of wood. That one we started in 1868 and it hasn't burnt down yet. Fingers crossed though, because it does take a bit of inspiration from Notre Dame in Paris. So we're keeping an eye on that one. Yeah. Now the town hall took 20 years to build and the QVV took 5. How long do you think it took to finish St Mary's Cathedral? 20, fairly reasonable. 130.
What?
I know, you'd think we'd be better at it by then. It was 1999, we had the Sydney Olympics coming the next year, so we looked around and went, yep, okay, I reckon we're ready. Okay. What? Oh shit, the cathedral. We forgot to put the steeples on the towers. Oh. They were part of the original design. We just didn't get around to it until we had the visitors coming over. So it is finished and it's free to go walk through every day. It's also the longest cathedral in Australia, if that's an important stat for you. But back to the park here for the local Gadigal people. This was a fertile hunting ground with a freshwater stream running from the middle right down to the harbour. It's also where the 29 clans of the Eora Nation would gather to settle arguments between themselves with a ceremonial sporting contest. Now, the Eora Nation is just one of 250 nations across the continent of Australia, and the Gadigal clan is one of up to 500 to 1,000 different clans as well. So there's a huge variety of cultures across the landscape of Australia, and they've been in the continent for at least 65,000 years, the oldest continuing cultures anywhere in the world. Now, there are 250 distinct languages. Only about 130 are still around. Some of them very endangered, only a couple of speakers. But the national government has committed money in the next few years to teaching some of these languages in primary schools, so the kids can grow up learning the language of the land they were born in. A nice tangible connection back to the history, and once you understand a person's language, you get more of their culture as well with it. Now, through 30,000 years here in Sydney specifically, we get to 1770, when Captain James Cook sails via New Zealand and hits the east coast of Australia. Claiming it and naming it for Britain, he was the first European to encounter the east coast. He named it New South Wales, because there's one bit of coastline on the southern coast of New South Wales with some beaches and cliffs that looked a little bit like one part of Pembrokeshire in southern Wales. So he named the entire eastern half of the continent after that one bit. Now, the Dutch had named the western half New Holland, and that looks even less like Old Holland. Yeah. But the British started arriving here to settle or invade in 1788. The first fleet of convicts, and there were 1,400 people, just over half of them convicts or prisoners. And they were sent here partly to sort of get rid of them, because London was overflowing with prisoners in their prisons, but also to put them to work. The British needed to make sure that the French, the Dutch and the Spanish didn't get their hands on Australia, so they needed to quickly build up a colony, and the convicts were their very own slave labour force. We didn't used to call it slavery, but you know, you stole a handkerchief and you were sent around the world for 7 years and you're basically into forced labour. It's pretty much slavery. Now, they had a difficult time when they got here as well. Everyone, the convicts, the settlers, the local indigenous people encountering the British, but from the settlers' side, it was the rain. We were in a period of droughts when they got here, and it's very sandy soil. So it's fine for the local plants, but even when it did rain, it was very hard to grow any food crops here. Luckily, by the early 1790s, the rain had started again. We managed to hold on that long through some very strict rationing, and we found better farming soil in the west of Sydney. So we were able to start growing some food, slowly growing the colony with it, mainly via convict transportation. That was our main immigration policy. And then in the 1840s, we stopped accepting convicts, and we needed a new source of immigration and labour. No one really wanted to come out here yet because it was on the other side of the world, and unless you liked wool, it wasn't really a reason to come here. Bondi and Manly weren't popular yet, right? So we needed something else. 1851, we found gold. The gold rushes drew people into the city and into the area, but they found way more gold down in Victoria, and it all flowed through Melbourne, making Melbourne for 30 years the richest city in the entire world. Gave them the nickname Marvellous Melbourne. They built some beautiful buildings and they really thrived during that time. We gave them another nickname because there is one important thing they didn't build until the early 1900s. A sewerage system. Fairly important for a city, so we called them Smelbourne. Very creative, I know. That's not why the river's brown down there now, it's just brown. But look, the rivalry between Sydney and Melbourne is more of a Melbourne thing. We're quite happy in Sydney. We let you make up your own minds about which is the best city here. Brisbane, beautiful, very chill and lovely vibes up there. Hobart, beautiful. Adelaide, you know, lots of great cities. Melbourne, they're very insistent on Melbourne being the best city. They're very keen on that. Comes up every 5 minutes or so, if you've done the Melbourne tour. It is a great city, right? Great food, coffee, culture, nightlife, the sporting capital of Australia as well. They remind us of that quite a lot. But the rivalry really came to a head in 1901. That's when the colonies of Australia came together and federated as a country. Now, we needed two things, a name and a capital. The name was pretty easy, because the continent was Terra Australis, Latin for land in the south. Well, we just shortened that to Australia. The country just means south. Pretty accurate description, it'd be like calling Canada north. But there was a trickier debate with the capital. There are two main candidates. Sydney, saying we're the oldest with all the heritage. Melbourne said we're bigger than them and we're richer than them. Well, that's a pretty good argument. But we still couldn't quite decide. Like a lot of countries, we compromised. We went Sydney, Melbourne, let's just build a brand new city halfway between in the middle of nowhere. Canberra. Stupid place to build a city. Boiling hot in summer, freezing cold in winter, nowhere near the beach. What's the point? Well, you got to put the politicians somewhere. It does have some very good galleries and museums and some bushwalks on Mount Ainslie as well. But for the first 20 years, while we were building Canberra, Melbourne was the temporary capital. But Canberra is also closer to Sydney, so, you know, we both won. Now, since 1901, it's been a pretty peaceful place here in Sydney. Very modern, multicultural city. About a third of the population was born overseas, and just over 40% have at least one parent born overseas as well. So we're very proud to be a big melting pot here in Sydney. But we'll get out of the park, see the rest of the city now, head down that way, see why a lot of things are called Macquarie.
When we stop it, yes, they have it to that walk direction. Yeah, I know. But yeah, cars dumb.
This is Governor Lachlan Macquarie, our fifth governor in the colony, started in 1810. He was the first governor to really start building out Sydney into a proper settlement rather than just a little convict settlement. He built a lot of public infrastructure, a lot of useful buildings. He built the road along here with all the old government buildings along it. At the time, it was the grandest street in Sydney. And you'll never guess what he named that one. Macquarie Street. Pretty much everything he built ended up being called Macquarie. Funny that. There are a lot of things named after him as well, because he was very influential. But all the governors named things after themselves. It wasn't just him. And also anything old in Sydney called Elizabeth, it's not named after one of the Queens Elizabeth, it's his wife Elizabeth. You know, he shared it around a little bit. But to do all of his building works, he needed a good architect. He had Francis Greenway, a convict sentenced to 14 years transportation for forging some financial documents. Luckily for us, he was a much better architect than a forger. We actually put him on one side of Australia's first ever $10 note. Only country in the world to put a forger on the money. It's basically a challenge. He's not on there anymore if you're looking for him. Now it's a guy called Banjo Patterson who wrote the words for Waltzing Matilda, an old folk song which nearly became our national anthem. Kind of glad it didn't, because it's about a guy who steals a sheep and then, rather than being captured by the authorities, drowns himself in a lake. Well, a lovely sentiment for our national anthem. We went with something a bit more serious instead. I'll tell you a bit more about some of Francis Greenway's buildings on the other side of the road.
Good, thank you.
Where's you from?
I'm from Latvia. I'm living in Sydney. I just
okay.
with friends, like for company.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Which part of Sydney?
Now in Oyster Bay. It's to Sutherlandshire.
Sorry?
Sutherlandshire.
Ah, yes. Yeah, my geography of that area is not great because I'm from Hornsby, up on the other end. Not been around there much.
Yeah. I'm sometimes going to that side. Also have lots of friends around the Sydney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feel free to take a seat, guys.
Wow. Sure.
Yes. Alright, so Francis Greenway. Still got some of his buildings around us. We've got Hyde Park Barracks, just here. Now, Hyde Park Barracks was finished in 1819. It was started in 1817. It's like the date of it. But yeah, it was finished in 1819 to house all the convicts, keep them contained in one place. And since then, it's been an immigration centre, women's asylum, all sorts of things. Nowadays, it's a fantastic free museum to the history of that building and early colonial Sydney as well. It's probably my pick for museums in Sydney. It's really good. Should mention, anywhere I recommend, it's not paid, it's just from me, my friends, or the other guys. So as long as you trust me, you can trust the recommendations. But we got another Francis Greenway building just over there, St James Church, the oldest surviving church in Sydney from 1824, but also for the first 50 or so years of its life, the tallest building in Sydney. Yeah, no, it doesn't even stand out from the trees. You gotta remember, we really did not have a big population for a long time. The gold rushes kick-started it, but it took a while to get going, so it was just game. Now, the current tallest structure, Sydney Tower, 309 metres if you include the antenna, which I think is cheating, but they all do it. Auckland Sky Tower is basically half antenna, and it still counts. But the observation deck and the bar get you pretty good views over Sydney. On a clear day like this, you can see to the west to the Blue Mountains and to the north to the Central Coast. But you don't get a great view of the Harbour Bridge, and in fact you can barely even see the Opera House from up there. Which is a bit of a shame, right? It is still a good view, just remember that that bit is kind of blocked, right? It's the highest you'll get up the view, the rest of Sydney is still great, but there is somewhere close to the water where you can get an uninterrupted view of the harbour. I'll point it out when we're down there. If you want to head up, the observation deck is $33 if you buy the ticket on the day. More expensive on the weekend, cheaper if you book to head online in advance. There's also 2 layers of rotating restaurants up there, which are pretty expensive, The bottom layer up there, it's a bar. The bar doesn't rotate, but it does have a great view as well, and a $30 minimum spend per person. It's basically the same price as an observation deck, so you may as well go up to the bar, enjoy the view, have a couple of drinks. Trust me, it doesn't take long to get to $30. Yeah. We'll leave the view, we'll head down Macquarie Street and see our rum hospital.
Jag kan inte... Det faktum att vi inte behöver tänka så att ska vi faktiskt spendera de pengarna på det. Sen kan man argumentera om det. Men i alla fall... där normalt ser ut att det ska vara många på det där. Så har jag heller inte.
I'll tell you about speaking in a minute. Don't worry. First thing you want to reach out to building is a brand new hospital. So, into the proper settlement.
На счастье. Загадай желание. Куда?
Rum was so valuable that he even used it as currency for a little while. It was a bit chaotic. Macquarie went to three businessmen and said, I'll give you guys exclusive rights to the import and sale of rum for a few years if you use some of the profits to build us a hospital. Not a bad deal, because they walked past the white building. That was the southern wing of the hospital. This is the central wing of the hospital. That's the northern wing of the hospital. We drank a lot of rum. What can I say? So much rum that the northern wing, not even used as hospital. Totally extra. It was surgeons' accommodations, courthouses, and it very quickly became New South Wales Parliament House, which it still is today, meaning our Parliament House was built and funded entirely by rum. Amazing it's still standing. The southern wing was the first wing finished, 1816. It's our oldest surviving public building. But it had many uses. The main one started in 1856, when it became the first branch of the Royal Mint outside London, making coins, keeping a closer eye on the gold from the gold rush. Nowadays, it's a small free museum and a restaurant open during weekdays. The central wing was used as Sydney Hospital and is still in use today. It's a bit more active on the other side. But yeah, this wing used to be the same size as the other two as well. And then in 1879, it wasn't big enough or modern enough to cater for the growing population here in Sydney. So we demolished it. We rebuilt in 1894, similar time to the QVB, so similar Romanesque revival style. Now, this guy here, Il Porcellino, little pig, a little ball in Italian. He's a copy of the 500-year-old bronze from Florence, which is a self-copy of the 2,000-year-old marble from Rome. This one, donated in 1968 by an Italian sculptor, whose father and brother were surgeons in the hospital, as a thank you, and a symbol of the growing friendship between the two countries post the Second World War. Now, this one they do call a fountain as well. Yeah, there is a drip every now and then. So today when you see it's never been running anymore. But the idea is you come and donate money to the net, and then the money goes to the reason you come. You get your luck out of it by coming to know. Lucky in specific parts in life, lucky to run other parts. You're gonna wait for the next set of guys. My way the one after. Still, people still want love. Very good. Alright guys. What brings you good down?
We came to the show at the house last night.
What did you say?
Never played the game, but
Good show? Oh, that's good. Yeah, I play at City regularly with friends. So it's a lot of fun. Yeah. Yes. It's still a mix. It's definitely still a mix. The last I heard was the offices are about 2/3 capacity. Yeah, so still a lot down. But yeah, definitely most companies are doing the hybrid. So maybe 3 days in, 2 days. Alrighty, we've just started walking down through Marsden Place. Marsden Place is the semi-pedestrianised area that's down at the bottom of the hill. And it's named after James Marsden, a Premier of New South Wales a few times in the mid-1800s. It's like Prime Minister state. Now, one of his main focuses as a Premier was public education, because when he was a boy, he had to walk 20 kilometres from the west of Sydney to get to school every day. He still had to get home, so he was often found sleeping on the side of the road on the way back home. So the statue representing him is 12-year-old James on his way to school. I say it's 12-year-old James. We don't know what he looked like when he was 12. It's a kid, but it represents James. Now, Martin Place is also the financial hub of Sydney. A lot of the tech companies and banks have their headquarters around here. We would normally have here the RBA, the Reserve Bank of Australia. Essentially the government bank. But they've been under renovation for 5 years. They're already $1 billion over budget, and it's planned to go for another 3 to 4 years. There's a good reason they're taking their time: asbestos. basically every wall and ceiling in that building is riddled with asbestos. Right? So they're really taking their time and being careful. I think most people in Sydney would have said, could you just also knock it down at the same time and build a nicer one? But that's not such a great idea sustainability-wise, right? So they figured they'd just bring it back. But, you know, it does give us a chance to see all the lovely old photos of Sydney. That's fine. But we keep heading down towards the bottom of the market.
Yeah, we don't have as much of that.
I do like this.
I'm not
This used to be one of the big banks, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. It's now just some shops, but above the doorway, it still has the coat of arms of Australia. It's got the kangaroo up on the left and the emu up on the right, holding up the shield of Australia. There's a very good reason we chose those two animals to be up there. Anyone know what that is? Yeah, what is it? They can't go backwards, right? Yeah. They're native, but also more importantly, they can't walk backwards. Kangaroos can sort of move backwards, but they have to lean back on their tail and sort of scamper. It's not walking, right? So it still holds. That's a nice symbol, symbolising Australia's forward progress. There are also 21 countries around the world which eat the animals on their coat of arms. We're part of the club. Kangaroos more commonly than eating. Emus, fine. Kangaroo, it's a bit like beef. They're a little bit chewier if you don't cook it right, because there's no fat on them. They're environmentally sustainable, they're hunted wild, there's more of them than us, so there's plenty to eat, don't worry. And, you know, you can try it in Sydney. It's not on every menu, right? It's not a super common thing, but there are a few. We put them in the recommendations for you. So on the maps, there's a QR code you can scan, will take you to this list of recommendations. You also get a link to them at the end of the tour if you made a booking. You also just come around to my place, I'll cook you some kangaroo. Why not? I love it. But there's one other thing up there. It's not in colour, I know, but there is a plant on the coat of arms. Right? It's the golden wattle. It's got all the little balls on it, right? So in colour, it is green and yellow. Green for the leaves and yellow for flower, the golden wattle. That's why our sporting colours are green and gold. Because a lot of people will see our flag and they're like, how come Australia's green and gold if that's not on their flag? That's why. The golden wattle. Right? Yeah. But yeah, we'll leave that. We'll keep heading down to the bottom of Marketplace.
Are they also the marks on the inside of the shield in the City States? Yeah, I think so. Is that how? Yes. I should know this. I know. Yes. I'm probably going to be teaching it the next month, but. And my number, that's all my power.
Alright, so we're down the bottom of Martin Place with the GPO, the General Post Office. It's built between 1866 and 1891. Originally, they thought it might be a rival to London's Houses of Parliament and Big Ben. Yeah, look, I mean, it's nice, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Also, yes, I know technically it's not Big Ben, it's Elizabeth Tower. You know what I mean. Now, the building is no longer a post office, it's a hotel with some restaurants and shops down the bottom and a tiny little post office over in the corner, if you still need any stamps. But the building that was where a lot of men signed up to fight in the First World War. We also celebrated the end of the war all up and down through Martin Place. So this is where we chose to put the cenotaph, a memorial to the Anzac soldiers, the Australia and New Zealand Army Corps. The biggest military commemoration in Australia and New Zealand is Anzac Day, the 25th of April. Marks the beginning of the Gallipoli campaign in modern-day Turkey in 1915. Very bloody campaign, ultimately unsuccessful in the end for us, but a very important one for the national identities and mythos of the newly formed nations of Australia and New Zealand. Also, a very good movie starring a young Mel Gibson before he went crazy, and when he was still Australian. Gallipoli, that's a good movie. But still speaking of war, the clock tower up there really stood out during the Second World War, still one of the tallest spots in Sydney. We thought it was a little bit too useful for Japanese bombers to navigate by. So in 1942, we took the whole clock tower down, brick by brick, put it underground into storage. We finally put it back in the 1960s. I think the danger had passed by then, certainly from the Japanese. But we found a word written on the inside of the bell in that tower that you just heard when we put it back up there. Eternity. Now, eternity was appearing all over Sydney in that handwriting from the 30s to the 60s, and we didn't know why until one day in 1956. The Reverend found one of his parishioners bent over the pavement writing eternity on the footpath. Arthur Stace. He was an alcoholic, illiterate, petty criminal until 1932, when he heard his reverend in church say the words, "Eternity, eternity." I wish that I could sound or shout that word to every person in the streets of Sydney. Well, Arthur took that as a personal calling. So every day he got up at 4 a.m. and he went to a different part of Sydney with his chalk, writing eternity 30 or 40 times to spread the word. And they estimate he wrote that word 500,000 times around Sydney. Not a bad effort for a former alcoholic criminal who still couldn't sign his own name properly. Now, there's only one example of eternity written by Arthur still surviving today. That is the one on the inside of the bell in the tower. It's not very permanent though, but his message is definitely still around because that flyer was from last week. So, still around in spirit, I guess. But yeah, we'll leave him there and we'll head to... Well, it's really ended the tour, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, we're going to head down one of our laneways now. Alright, so we're in Angel Place and we have Forgotten Songs. Now in 2009 we put a lot of temporary art installations into our laneways. We were trying to copy Melbourne. There's no shame in that. It's a great city. It's got a lot of street art, hidden bars, cafes down its laneway. We tried to copy that aspect. Most of ours were just temporary art installations. Didn't really pan out. But this one, we made it permanent because we really liked it. Now the bird cages have no birds in them, they never have, they just have speakers which play the bird song from 50 species which are not extinct, they just can't live around this part of the city anymore. Right? If you head out to the suburbs you might start to hear them again, and if you come back later in the day you'll hear different birds because it's all timed when they'd be active throughout the day, and as we walk through you'll see the names of the species under our feet. I know there's a place.
Basically, along the waterfront, either side of the harbour. Certain areas, yes. Now, if you want to get into the city, it's not too bad. Definitely some other transport difference. We do the felt the city and the floodplain, single family home stuff I think because we're so far away from them, we want to get out and see it. Because cool.
Just do weekend trips if we go like to Europe or whatever. We're there.
Oh,
like,
God, yeah.
You know, we go while we're here.
I mean, you can't even do a weekend trip to New Zealand. Right? It's
exactly.
just impossible.
All right, so behold our silver shish kebab. You know, it's just what we call it because it looks a bit like a shish kebab. Its actual name, it's got two names. Pyramid Tower, it's what the artist called it, and it's also the Dobell Memorial. William Dobell was an influential Australian painter from the early 20th century. This was designed as a memorial to him in the 70s. It used to be in the middle of Martin Place. It was moved around here, around the corner, in 1999, kind of hidden away. Now, the artist was Bert Flugelmann, an Austrian-born Australian artist, mainly a painter, until a fire destroyed all of his studio and his paintings in the 60s. He re-evaluated his career, decided to focus more on stainless steel geometric sculptures. So this is one of his more well-known ones. The other one is down in Adelaide, in Rundle Mall. It's like Pitt Street Mall, Rundle Mall. Two big metal spheres on top of each other. He calls it spheres. Very straightforward with his names. But so are we, so we call it the mall's balls. So we'll leave the kebab and the balls behind. We've got one more Macquarie stop and then our rest stop. another place named by Macquarie, Macquarie Place. Very imaginative. I don't know if you knew there were other names, but yeah, this used to be a public square twice the size, marked the edge of the government domain, which is essentially where the Royal Botanic Garden is now, and the rest of the colony as well. It was landscaped and designed by Francis Greenway, but also Elizabeth Macquarie. She was very important for the urban planning or running of Sydney in the 1810s. Really helped Lachlan out quite a lot. Now, these anchor and cannon, they are both from the HMS Sirius, one of two naval escort ships on the First Fleet. Provided defence to the fleet and the early colony as well. So this just represents the essentially early defence of Sydney. Behind it, we have a stone column, the Distance Obelisk. That was put there in 1818 by Macquarie and Greenway to mark the outward expansion of Sydney under Macquarie. And since 1818, that has been where all distances to and from Sydney have been measured. Quite literally the heart of the city, just over there. They chose that spot as well because that is where Macquarie thought the flag had been planted on the 26th of January 1788, marking the start of the colony of New South Wales, by extension Australia. But yeah, I'll tell you a bit more about that date a bit later on. Now we're going to head down around the corner to our rest stop.
We'll finish now that link because we have some break. We will be back after 15-20 minutes. And now I finish. If you're interested, you can come back after 15 minutes.